Ranger Paul Fugate. In the rugged wilderness of Arizona's Chiricahua National Monument, a park ranger walked into the landscape he knew by heart and never returned. What happened on that January afternoon in 1980 would spark decades of investigation. Theories ranging from cartel execution to voluntary escape, and a mystery that continues to haunt the National Park Service. Could the answer lie in those anonymous letters? The hypnotized witness? Or the miles of unexplored desert caves? Paul Braxton Fugate was born on September 2, 1938, in Brooklyn, New York. Though he grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, his early life shaped him into someone who would never quite fit the mold of traditional authority. After earning a biology degree from the University of Texas at Arlington, Fugate joined the National Park Service in 1963, working at renowned sites including Carlsbad Caverns and Navajo National Monument. However, his relationship with the Park Service was turbulent from the start. Fugate clashed repeatedly with his superiors over what they viewed as an anti-authority stance, a counterculture appearance, and grooming standards that didn't align with the conservative expectations of the 1970s Park Service. The tensions escalated until 1971, when he was fired for maintaining a mustache and displaying what supervisors called a negative attitude. Fugate fought back legally and was reinstated in 1976. A small victory that didn't resolve the underlying friction between his independent spirit and institutional demands. By 1980, the 41-year-old naturalist was working at Chiricahua National Monument, living in a sparse cabin on the grounds with his wife Dodie, whom he had married in 1964. Their relationship operated under an open arrangement, and Fugate was known to have affairs. He spent his free time observing wildlife, tinkering with vehicles, and immersing himself in the natural world he had dedicated his career to protecting. Despite his conflicts with management, he was knowledgeable and passionate about the monument's ecosystem, making his eventual disappearance all the more perplexing to those who knew the terrain as an extension of his own backyard. On January 13, 1980, around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Fugate left the visitor center to conduct a routine trail patrol near Faraway Ranch, a historic site within the monument. Before departing, he instructed a seasonal aide to close up the visitor center if he failed to return by 4:30 in the afternoon. The instructions seemed routine, but it would prove to be the last communication anyone would have with him. What made his departure unusual was that Fugate left without his radio, keys, or any personal items, equipment that rangers typically carried on patrols. When darkness fell and Fugate had not returned, his house guest grew concerned and alerted Superintendent Ted Scott, who immediately organized a flashlight search of the surrounding trails. The following morning brought a massive search effort. The Cochise County Sheriff's Office deployed a 22-person team along with tracking dogs, combing the rugged landscape for any sign of the missing ranger. By January 15th, helicopters joined the operation, and volunteers expanded the search radius to half a mile, rappelling down cliffs and checking ridges for any trace of Fugate. Investigators discovered footprints during the search, but these were later determined to belong to one of the searchers rather than the missing man. The official search operation continued for 2 weeks, employing increasingly sophisticated methods, but yielded nothing concrete. Volunteers refused to give up, continuing their efforts for years afterward, exploring remote trails and abandoned mine shafts that dotted the monument's landscape. The investigation took several intriguing turns as potential witnesses came forward. Dick Horton reported seeing Fugate slumped in a green pickup truck with 2 men on the day of his disappearance. Under hypnosis, Horton provided detailed descriptions of the occupants, describing the driver as appearing to be in his 30s with a beard reminiscent of Kenny Rogers and wearing a plaid shirt, while the passenger wore a green jacket. These details, while vivid, couldn't be independently verified. More disturbing were anonymous letters that arrived implicating two men named Ernest Goff and Tex Carpenter, both of whom had stolen a truck shortly after Fugate's disappearance. Carpenter initially claimed that Goff had shot Fugate, but later recanted his statement, leaving investigators with another dead end. In a separate incident, a Wisconsin man boasted to acquaintances about taking the life of an officer. But when subjected to a polygraph examination, he failed to provide any credible evidence linking him to Fugate's case. In 2018, nearly 4 decades after the disappearance, the National Park Service increased the reward for information to $60,000 following new leads that suggested the case might still be solvable. Special Agent Clay Anderson took charge of the renewed investigation, employing modern technology, including drone flyovers and cadaver dogs, to search areas that had been inaccessible or overlooked in the original investigation. The fresh approach reflected both technological advancement and the enduring determination to find answers. But the terrain's vastness and the passage of time continued to work against resolution. 3 primary theories have emerged over the decades. The most widely discussed involves connections to illicit substance smuggling operations, as Cochise County served as a major corridor for trafficking in the 1980s. Investigators theorized that Fugate might have witnessed something he shouldn't have, leading to his elimination by smugglers who couldn't risk exposure. The second theory suggests voluntary disappearance, pointing to his troubled relationship with the Park Service, his unconventional personal life, and the possibility that he simply walked away from it all. The third theory proposes an accident in the treacherous wilderness, though the complete absence of any remains makes this less likely, given the thorough searches conducted. The disappearance devastated Dodie Fugate, who found herself in an unexpected battle with the very organization her husband had served. The Park Service initially demanded she repay benefits, citing the possibility that Fugate had abandoned his position. She fought this determination and finally won her case in 1989, when authorities acknowledged that evidence pointed more strongly toward foul play than voluntary departure. In discussing her refusal to give up on her husband, Dodie stated that accepting abandonment would mean betraying their relationship, which she viewed as a profound form of disloyalty. Superintendent Ted Scott, who led the initial search efforts, reflected on the emotional toll the case took on the monument's staff, noting that losing a ranger felt deeply personal and that every hike thereafter carried the hope of discovery. Investigator Craig Emanuel, who worked the case for years, maintained his belief that this particular mystery could be solved with the right breakthrough. As of 2025, no body has been recovered and no definitive answers have emerged. The case remains active but frustrating, a testament to how thoroughly someone can vanish even in an area they knew intimately. While Fugate vanished in the wilderness, the next case unfolded in a very different setting. Samuel Boyelke. On a crisp autumn morning at one of America's most beautiful national parks, a family outing became every parent's nightmare. Samuel Boyelke, known as Sammy, disappeared into the woods at Crater Lake National Park on October 14, 2006. And despite nearly 2 decades of searching, no trace of him has ever been found. The case highlights the particular dangers that wilderness areas pose and the agonizing uncertainty faced by families when their loved ones vanish without explanation. Sammy was born around 1998 in the Portland area. He had autism, which influenced how he interacted with the world around him and how he might have responded to finding himself alone in an unfamiliar environment. Those who knew Sammy described him as curious and energetic, characteristics that would become crucial factors in understanding what might have happened on that October day. His family had chosen Crater Lake, known for its stunning sapphire waters and pristine forests. as a destination for what should have been a memorable family adventure. The family arrived at the park on what appeared to be an ordinary visit. Crater Lake National Park, located in southern Oregon, features dense forests surrounding the caldera that holds the deepest lake in the United States. The trails wind through old-growth timber, and the terrain can be challenging even for experienced hikers. On the afternoon of October 14th, Sammy was playing near the woods while his family was nearby. In what seemed like an instant, he darted into the tree line. His family immediately pursued him, calling his name, but Sammy had vanished into the forest with a speed that caught everyone off guard. The forest swallowed him up, and despite the family's frantic searching, they couldn't locate him. Park rangers were notified immediately, and a massive search operation commenced within hours. The initial response included ground teams, tracking dogs, and helicopter overflights of the surrounding wilderness. Searchers faced significant challenges due to the dense vegetation and the rugged topography that characterizes the region. The forest floor was covered with thick underbrush that could easily conceal someone, particularly someone of Sammy's size. The official search continued for days, with teams working around the clock covering grids of territory, checking ravines, searching under fallen logs, and investigating any area where someone might seek shelter. Despite these exhaustive efforts, searchers found no clothing, no footprints, and no evidence that Sammy had passed through any particular area. Over the years, Sammy's father, Kenneth, has refused to give up hope. In September 2025, a new search effort was organized, bringing together volunteers, professional search teams, and cadaver dogs to once again comb the areas surrounding where Sammy was last seen. Kenneth has stated his determination to find his son and put the question to rest, expressing the ongoing pain of not knowing what happened. Investigator Joe Kirsten, who has worked the case, acknowledged the frustration inherent in searches that yield no results, noting that the lack of any evidence makes it nearly impossible to determine what occurred. The prevailing theory among investigators is that Sammy likely succumbed to exposure in the hours or days following his disappearance. October temperatures at Crater Lake can drop significantly, particularly at night, and someone without proper clothing or shelter would face life-threatening conditions. The forest also contains natural hazards, such as hidden ravines, unstable ground, and water features that could prove dangerous. Some have speculated about other possibilities, but without any evidence of foul play or any witnesses reporting suspicious activity in the area. Investigators have focused primarily on environmental factors. As of 2025, the case remains open, with investigators continuing to pursue any leads that might finally explain what happened on that autumn day, nearly 2 decades ago. The wilderness would claim another life under equally mysterious circumstances. George Penka. When a group hiking trip in Yosemite National Park ended with one member missing, searchers expected to find an injured hiker somewhere on the familiar trails. Instead, George Penka Jr. vanished on June 17, 2011, launching an investigation that would reveal just how easily someone can disappear in terrain visited by millions each year. George Penka Jr. was born in 1981 in Hawthorne, California. He was 30 years old at the time of his disappearance, working and living a quiet life in Southern California. Those who knew Penka described him as someone who enjoyed outdoor activities and maintained an active lifestyle. He was a regular churchgoer, reflecting a spiritual dimension to his life that his family and friends emphasized when discussing his character. His decision to join a group hike in Yosemite seemed consistent with his interests and personality, representing a weekend activity rather than an unusual adventure. On June 17, 2011, Penka was participating in a group hike in Yosemite National Park, one of America's most visited and photographed wilderness areas. The group was hiking in the Hetch Hetchy area, a region known for its reservoir dramatic granite cliffs, and well-maintained trails. The hike was not considered particularly challenging, and the group included multiple people who knew the route. At some point during the trek, Penka separated from the others. Accounts differ on exactly how this separation occurred, whether he deliberately stepped away, fell behind, or took a different path. But the result was that when the group realized he was no longer with them, they couldn't locate him. The group immediately alerted park rangers, who initiated a search operation. Yosemite's search and rescue teams are among the most experienced in the country, regularly conducting operations in the park's challenging terrain. They deployed ground teams, helicopters, and tracking dogs to search the areas surrounding the hiking route. The search focused on likely scenarios, such as someone getting disoriented and wandering off trail, suffering an injury that prevented them from calling for help, or encountering one of the many natural hazards present in the wilderness. Despite days of intensive searching covering hundreds of acres, teams found no sign of Penka, no discarded equipment, no tracks, and no evidence of his passage through any particular area. The investigation explored various theories about what might have happened. The most straightforward explanation suggests that Penka became disoriented, wandered off the established trail, and encountered trouble in the form of a fall, injury, or exposure to the elements. Yosemite's terrain includes steep drop-offs, fast-moving water, and areas where even a minor mistake can prove fatal. The granite surfaces can be slippery, particularly near water, and someone who fell in a remote area might never be found given the vast expanse of wilderness. While investigators haven't entirely ruled out foul play, the absence of any evidence suggesting a confrontation or struggle has kept the focus on accidental causes. As of 2025, George Penka Jr. remains missing. No evidence has emerged to explain his fate, and the case serves as a sobering reminder that disappearances can occur even in areas with substantial search and rescue infrastructure. His family continues to hope for answers, while investigators maintain that any new information could potentially break open the case. The Hetch Hetchy area of Yosemite remains as beautiful and popular as ever. But for those who remember George Penka, it also represents a place where questions outnumber answers. From the hiking trails of California to the quiet countryside of England, mystery would strike in very different circumstances. Linda Bryant. On an ordinary autumn afternoon in rural Cornwall, Linda Bryant took her dog for a walk and never returned home. What happened on October 20th, 1998, would become one of England's most perplexing cold cases, marked by credible suspects, mysterious witnesses, and evidence that tantalizingly suggested connections to other unsolved cases. Linda Bryant, known to friends and family as Lynn, was born in 1957. By October 1998, she was a 41-year-old mother of two, living in the village of Ruin High Lanes in Cornwall. Those who knew her described a woman devoted to her family, active in her community, and entirely unremarkable in the sense that nothing about her life suggested that she might become the target of targeted harm. She had no known enemies, no involvement in anything illicit, and no apparent reason why anyone would wish her harm. Her daily routine included walking the family dog, a normal activity that on this particular day would prove fatal. On October 20th, 1998, Bryant left her home in the early afternoon to walk her dog along a familiar route through the countryside. She typically followed paths she had traveled many times before, feeling safe in an area she knew well. When she failed to return home at the expected time, her family grew concerned and began searching the local area. Her body was discovered in a field near the village, having been attacked with what investigators determined was significant intent to harm. The dog was found nearby, unharmed but distressed, having remained with its owner throughout the ordeal. Devon and Cornwall police launched an immediate investigation, treating the case as a targeted incident from the outset. Forensic examination revealed that Bryant had been struck multiple times, and the nature of the attack suggested a level of intent that ruled out accident or misunderstanding. Investigators collected evidence from the scene, including soil samples, fiber evidence, and partial DNA profiles that would later prove crucial. The location itself was relatively isolated, a factor that both helped and hindered the investigation. The isolation meant fewer potential witnesses, but it also suggested that whoever attacked Bryant had either followed her there or had been waiting. Both scenarios that pointed toward deliberate action rather than random encounter. The investigation uncovered several potential witnesses who had been in the area around the time of the attack. Multiple people reported seeing a suspicious vehicle parked near the location where Bryant was walking. Descriptions varied, but several witnesses independently mentioned a similar type of vehicle, lending credibility to the sightings. Additionally, witnesses reported seeing a man behaving oddly in the vicinity around the relevant time frame. These witness accounts formed a significant part of the investigation, though the lack of definitive identification meant that the leads remained frustratingly inconclusive. One aspect of the case that has drawn particular attention involves potential links to similar incidents in the region. Investigators noted similarities to other cases involving women attacked while alone in rural areas, though establishing definitive connections between separate incidents proved challenging. The pattern suggested someone who deliberately targeted women in isolated circumstances, but without concrete evidence linking the cases. This remained a theory rather than established fact. Forensic analysis of evidence collected from various scenes yielded partial DNA profiles, but the technology available in the late 1990s was not as advanced as what would later become available. Detective Inspector Steve Borland, who worked extensively on the case, expressed concern that the perpetrator might strike again if not identified and apprehended. This concern reflected the investigative assessment that Bryant's attack showed characteristics of someone who had planned and executed a deliberate assault. Characteristics that often indicate repeated behavior. The detective's public statements aimed both to reassure the community that the investigation remained active and to encourage anyone with information to come forward. Over the years, the investigation has seen periodic renewed efforts. In 2023, police announced new leads prompted by advances in forensic technology and a review of the original evidence. DNA analysis techniques that didn't exist in 1998 allowed investigators to develop more complete profiles from the degraded evidence collected at the scene. These profiles were compared against national databases and checked against suspects who had been considered during the original investigation. While these efforts generated renewed hope, they have not yet resulted in an arrest or charges. The case has remained prominent in Cornwall, with regular appeals for information and media coverage that has kept Bryant's story in public consciousness. Investigators have emphasized that someone in the community likely has information that could prove crucial, whether they recognize its significance or not. The theory holds that in a rural area where most people know their neighbors, someone might have noticed unusual behavior, unexplained absences, or other details that seemed unremarkable at the time, but could be meaningful to investigators. Bryant's glasses were found at the scene, a detail that investigators believe might trigger memories for potential witnesses. The glasses were distinctive enough that someone who saw them might remember the detail, potentially placing them or someone they know at the location. Small details like this often prove crucial in cold cases when witnesses come forward years later with information they didn't realize was relevant. As of 2025, Linda Bryant's case remains officially unsolved. Devon, Cornwall police continue to treat it as an active investigation, and the evidence collected remains preserved for potential future analysis. The next case would lead investigators into a puzzle unlike any they had encountered before. Ricky McCormick. In the summer of 1999, the body of Ricky McCormick was discovered in a Missouri cornfield. And in his pocket, investigators found 2 handwritten notes that would baffle cryptographers, amateur code breakers, and federal agencies for decades. The messages, filled with a seemingly random collection of letters and numbers, have resisted every attempt at interpretation, leaving both the cause of McCormick's demise and the meaning of his final writings shrouded in mystery. Ricky McCormick was born in 1958 in St. Louis, Missouri. He grew up in the St. Louis area, navigating a life marked by economic challenges and limited educational opportunities. McCormick had dropped out of school and was known to have struggled with basic literacy, a fact that would later make the coded notes found on his body all the more perplexing. How could someone with documented literacy challenges create what appeared to be an elaborate cipher? This contradiction has fueled speculation about the note's authorship, purpose, and significance. By 1999, McCormick was 41 years old, living day to day with various health issues and surviving on disability payments. McCormick was last seen alive on June 25, 1999. 3 days later, on June 29th, a motorist discovered his body in a cornfield near West Alton, Missouri, approximately 20 miles from his St. Louis home. The location was isolated, accessible by rural roads that saw little traffic. The body showed signs of decomposition consistent with having been there for several days, and the summer heat had accelerated the process, complicating efforts to determine exactly how McCormick had met his end. There was no identification on the body initially, and investigators had to use fingerprints to establish his identity. The most startling discovery came when investigators searched McCormick's pockets. They found 2 handwritten notes covered in what appeared to be coded messages. The notes contained a mix of letters, numbers, and symbols arranged in ways that suggested deliberate encoding rather than random scribbling. The messages included sequences like SE Penks RT and NCBE WLD NBLE, along with numbers that might represent dates, coordinates, or some other numerical information. The handwriting was confirmed to be McCormick's based on comparisons with known samples, but the content defied immediate interpretation. The medical examiner's investigation faced significant challenges due to the condition of the remains. The combination of decomposition and exposure to the elements made it difficult to determine a precise cause of passing. There was no obvious evidence of trauma such as gunshot wounds or stab marks that survived the decomposition process. But that didn't rule out various causes, including smothering, strangulation, or other methods that leave minimal physical evidence. The location of the body, far from where McCormick lived and in an area he had no known connection to, suggested that he either traveled there voluntarily or was transported after his passing. The FBI became involved in the case, bringing in the agency's cryptanalysis and racketeering records unit to attempt to decipher the notes. The specialists tried every known code-breaking technique, from simple substitution ciphers to complex polyalphabetic systems. They consulted with academic cryptographers, recruited amateur code breakers from the public, and even used computer algorithms to search for patterns. Despite these extensive efforts, the notes resisted decryption. FBI analyst Dan Olson noted that the only thing clearly identifiable in the messages was McCormick's own name, which appeared in a recognizable form. Everything else remained impenetrable. The investigation explored McCormick's background and activities in the days before his passing. Family members reported that he had seemed normal in his last interactions, giving no indication that he was in danger or planning anything unusual. Investigators looked into his known associates, examining whether he might have been involved in activities that could have made him a target. Some speculation centered on possible connections to illicit substance distribution networks, given the nature of his passing and the mysterious notes. But no concrete evidence emerged to support this theory. The notes themselves might have been related to such activities, recording transactions or contacts. But without being able to read them, investigators couldn't confirm or deny this possibility. In 2011, the FBI made a public appeal for help in decoding the messages, releasing high-quality images of the notes and inviting cryptographers and puzzle enthusiasts worldwide to attempt solving them. The appeal generated thousands of submissions from people convinced they had cracked the code. But none of the proposed solutions proved consistent or verifiable. Some suggested the notes weren't codes at all, but rather shorthand notation McCormick had developed for personal use, perhaps to help him remember information despite his literacy challenges. Others proposed they were deliberate red herrings, meaningless scribbling designed to confuse anyone who found them. The theory that someone else wrote the notes and placed them on McCormick's body has also been considered. This scenario would suggest that his passing was part of something more complex, with the notes serving as a message to others or as a deliberate attempt to mislead investigators. However, the confirmed match between the handwriting on the notes and known samples of McCormick's writing makes this theory problematic unless he was coerced into writing them before his passing. As of 2025, both the coded notes and McCormick's passing remain unsolved. The FBI maintains the case in its files, and the notes are preserved as evidence. Advances in computational analysis and artificial intelligence have raised hopes that modern technology might succeed where human analysts have failed. But so far, the messages continue to guard their secrets. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. From encrypted mysteries to a case that would shake a quiet English community. Kate Bushell. On a cold November evening in the English countryside, a routine dog walk turned into one of the most haunting, unsolved cases in British history. Kate Bushell was attacked while walking her family's dog near her home in Exwick, Devon, on November 15, 1997. The case would generate thousands of tips, numerous suspects, and decades of investigation. Yet no one has ever been charged. Kate was born in 1983 in Nottingham. By 1997, she was living with her family in Exwick, a suburban area on the outskirts of Exeter. Those who knew Kate described her as musical and bright. A student who enjoyed ordinary pursuits typical of someone her age. On the evening of November 15th, around 4:45 in the afternoon, Kate left her home to walk the family dog along a lane she had traveled many times before. When Kate failed to return home, her father went searching for her. He discovered Kate on Exwick Lane with the family dog standing guard beside her. She had been attacked, and despite immediate medical attention, she passed away shortly after. The dog was unharmed, having apparently remained with Kate throughout the ordeal. And this detail would later factor into investigative theories about what had occurred. Devon and Cornwall police launched an immediate investigation. Forensic examination of the scene revealed orange fibers on Kate's clothing that didn't match anything she had been wearing or anything from her home. These fibers became a crucial piece of evidence, suggesting physical contact with an attacker. DNA evidence was also collected from the scene, though the technology available in 1997 was less sophisticated than what would later become standard. The lane where Kate was found was relatively isolated, bordered by fields and hedgerows, with limited visibility from nearby homes. The investigation generated significant public interest and media coverage. Over 14,000 people were interviewed during the course of the investigation, and police pursued numerous leads. Detective Inspector John Stevens, who worked extensively on the case, stated that investigators believed there was a 90% chance the perpetrator was local to the area. This assessment was based on the timing, location, and circumstances of the attack, which suggested someone familiar with the area and Kate's routine. Several potential witnesses came forward with information about suspicious individuals or vehicles seen in the area around the time of the attack. However, none of these sightings led to a definitive identification. The investigation explored connections to other similar incidents in the region, though no concrete links were established. The case generated numerous theories about motive, ranging from a targeted attack by someone who knew Kate to a random encounter with a dangerous individual. In the years following the attack, police made several appeals for Barsai's information, particularly around significant anniversaries of the incident. The orange fibers remained a key focus, with investigators hoping someone might recognize the distinctive material. DNA profiles were re-examined as technology improved, and the case file remained active with periodic reviews using new forensic techniques. As of 2025, Kate Bushell's case remains unsolved. Appeals for information continue, and investigators maintain that the perpetrator is likely still alive and possibly still living in the area. The evidence collected at the scene remains preserved, awaiting the breakthrough that might finally bring justice. While this tragedy unfolded on a suburban lane, another mystery would emerge from the most unlikely of places. Joshua Maddox. In the summer of 2015, workers demolishing an abandoned cabin in Woodland Park, Colorado, made a discovery that would shock the community. Inside a chimney, they found the mummified remains of Joshua Maddox, who had been missing since May 2008. The circumstances surrounding his presence in the chimney and what led to his passing have remained subjects of intense debate and speculation. Joshua was born in 1990. He was known as creative and intelligent, with interests in art and music. Those who knew him described someone who was thoughtful and kind, though he had experienced personal challenges, including the earlier passing of his brother. By 2008, Joshua was living in Woodland Park with his family and had recently finished his education. On May 8, 2008, Joshua left his home and never returned. His disappearance prompted searches and appeals for information, but no trace of him was found. His father maintained the family home exactly as Joshua had left it for 7 years, hoping for his son's return. The family never gave up hope of finding answers about what had happened. The discovery in August 2015 provided those answers, but raised new questions. The cabin where Joshua's remains were found was located not far from his home, abandoned and scheduled for demolition. When workers began taking apart the structure, they found Joshua's body wedged inside the chimney. The position of the remains and the condition of the cabin's interior would become central to understanding what had occurred. Forensic examination determined that Joshua had died from hypothermia, and the coroner ruled the manner of his passing as accidental. The theory presented was that Joshua had attempted to enter the cabin through the chimney, became stuck, and was unable to free himself. However, several aspects of the scene troubled investigators and Joshua's family. The chimney opening was relatively small, and questions arose about how someone could have entered it in the way suggested. Dr. Michael Doberson, a forensic pathologist, noted that such a passing would not have been instant, and the process would have been gradual. This raised questions about whether Joshua could have called for help or whether anyone might have heard him. The cabin was in a somewhat isolated location, but it was not so remote that sounds couldn't potentially carry to nearby properties. Additional details about the scene added to the mystery. Some of Joshua's belongings, including his clothing, were found inside the cabin, but not on his body. This detail suggested he had been inside the cabin before entering the chimney. But the reasons for removing clothing and attempting to exit through the chimney remained unclear. Some theorized that Joshua might have been trying to leave through an unconventional route, while others questioned whether the scene had been staged. A local resident, Andy Lewis, known in the area, stated his strong disagreement with the official ruling, saying there was no way it happened as described. He and others familiar with the cabin and chimney found the accidental entry scenario difficult to accept, given the physical constraints of the space. These doubts have kept discussion of the case active in online forums and true crime communities. As of 2025, the case remains officially closed with the accidental determination standing. From the mountains of Colorado to the coastal city of Plymouth, another mystery awaited discovery. Esther Soper. On New Year's Day 1976, Esther Soper was found deceased in her Plymouth home, launching an investigation that would span decades without resolution. The case involved a respected member of the community whose life ended under circumstances that suggested a carefully planned attack. Yet, no one was ever charged. Esther was born around 1924. By 1976, she was a 52-year-old widow living in Plymouth, England. She was known as reclusive and deeply religious, a member of the Brethren faith who lived quietly and kept largely to herself. Those who knew her described someone who was careful about security and not inclined to let strangers into her home, a detail that would become significant to investigators. On January 1st, 1976, authorities were called to Esther's home after concerns were raised about her welfare. She was found deceased inside the property, and the circumstances immediately suggested foul play. The investigation revealed that someone had gained entry to the home and attacked Esther, though exactly how entry was achieved remained unclear given her cautious nature. The forensic examination faced limitations due to the technology available in 1976. DNA testing did not exist at the time, and investigators had to rely on more traditional methods of evidence collection and analysis. The scene was processed thoroughly, but the absence of advanced forensic tools meant that potential evidence might not have been recognized or properly preserved by modern standards. One significant aspect of the investigation involved possible connections to property viewings. There was speculation that Esther might have been showing her home to potential buyers or renters, which could have provided an opportunity for someone to gain access under false pretenses. However, this theory was never definitively proven, and alternative scenarios remained possible. The investigation interviewed neighbors and anyone who might have had contact with Esther in the days leading up to her passing. The challenge was that Esther's reclusive nature meant she had limited social interactions, making it difficult to establish who might have had reason or opportunity to harm her. The theory that emerged suggested a possible robbery that escalated, though this too remained speculative without concrete evidence. As years passed, the case grew cold. The limitations of 1970s forensic science meant that even if evidence had been collected, it might not yield useful information when re-examined with modern techniques. The passage of time also meant that potential witnesses aged or passed away, and memories faded. The case has periodically been reviewed by Devon and Cornwall police, particularly when new forensic techniques became available. However, no breakthrough has emerged. The lack of DNA evidence or other physical proof linking anyone to the scene has prevented the case from moving forward, despite investigators' continued interest in solving it. As of 2025, Esther Soper's case remains officially unsolved. It stands as one of Plymouth's most enduring mysteries, a case where the passage of time and the limitations of available forensic technology have combined to prevent justice. The investigation files remain open, but the likelihood of finding definitive answers diminishes with each passing year. While Esther's identity was known from the start, the next case would require decades just to establish who had been lost. Ronnie Jo Kirk. For 35 years, the skeleton found in a Madison, Wisconsin chimney in 1989 was known only as Chimney Doe. The mystery of the unidentified remains captivated investigators and the public alike, until advances in genetic genealogy finally provided answers in 2024 about who this person was, though questions about how and why remain. The remains were discovered in 1989 during renovation work on a building in Madison. Workers found a human skeleton wedged in the chimney structure, leading to an immediate investigation. The condition of the remains and their location made determining the circumstances of passing challenging. Forensic anthropologists examined the skeletal remains, establishing basic demographic information but finding no obvious signs of trauma that survived decomposition. For decades, the identity of Chimney Doe remained unknown despite extensive efforts. Investigators pursued traditional missing persons investigations, comparing the remains to reports of people who had disappeared from the area around the estimated time of passing. However, none of these comparisons produced a match. The case became a fixture in discussions of unidentified remains, representing the frustrating reality that even with physical evidence, establishing identity could prove impossible with the tools available at the time. The breakthrough came through genetic genealogy, a technique that has revolutionized cold case investigations. In May 2024, investigators announced that Chimney Doe had been identified as Ronnie Jo Kirk, bringing closure to at least one aspect of this decades-old mystery. Kirk was born in 1942 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and had been adopted. This background detail proved significant because it explained why traditional missing persons investigations had struggled to establish connections. The identification process involved extracting DNA from the skeletal remains and using genealogical databases to identify relatives. From there, investigators built family trees and worked backward to determine who the remains belonged to. This process, while revolutionary, is time-consuming and requires both technical expertise and genealogical research skills. The successful identification of Kirk demonstrated the power of this approach, but also highlighted how many cold cases might still be resolved if resources were available to apply these techniques broadly. With Kirk's identity established, investigators turned their attention to understanding how he came to be in the chimney and what led to his passing. The circumstances remained unclear. Possibilities ranged from accidental entry while attempting to access the building, to foul play, to other scenarios that might explain the unusual location. Details about clothing and personal effects found with the remains provided some clues but didn't definitively answer the question of intent or accident. The investigation into Kirk's final days faced challenges due to the passage of time. Potential witnesses from 1989 might no longer be alive or might not remember relevant details from 35 years prior. Records that might have documented Kirk's movements or circumstances in his final days might no longer exist. Despite these obstacles, investigators have continued pursuing leads, hoping that Kirk's identification might prompt someone to come forward with information. As of 2025, while Kirk's identity is now known, the circumstances of his passing remain officially undetermined. Investigators continue to examine the evidence and pursue any leads that might explain what happened. From decades of anonymity in Wisconsin to a case that would finally see resolution after even longer. Louisa Dunn. For 58 years, the attack on Louisa Dunn remained one of Britain's oldest unsolved cases. The elderly widow was attacked in her Bristol home on June 27 or 28, 1967. And despite extensive investigation, the case went cold for decades. What makes this case remarkable is that it was finally resolved in 2025 through DNA evidence, demonstrating that even the oldest cold cases can potentially yield justice. Louisa Jane Dunn was born in 1892. By 1967, she was a 75-year-old twice-widowed woman living alone in Bristol. She was well known in her local area, a reclusive but familiar figure to neighbors. On June 28, 1967, a neighbor discovered Louisa in her home and immediately contacted authorities. She had been attacked in circumstances that shocked the community. The initial investigation in 1967 was thorough by the standards of the time. Forensic evidence was collected, including material from Louisa's clothing, though DNA analysis did not exist yet. Investigators also collected palm prints from the scene. Witnesses reported hearing screams from Louisa's home, but no one had seen who entered or left the property. The investigation pursued various leads, but was ultimately unable to identify a suspect, and the case gradually went cold. For decades, Louisa's case remained unsolved, periodically reviewed by investigators, but yielding no breakthroughs. The evidence collected in 1967 was carefully preserved, a decision that would prove crucial when DNA technology became available. As forensic science advanced through the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s, cold cases began to be re-examined using new techniques. The breakthrough in Louisa's case came through persistent effort by investigators who refused to give up. Detective Inspector Dave Marchant described the perpetrator as a dangerous individual, and the investigation team was determined to bring justice even decades after the crime. Advances in DNA analysis allowed investigators to develop profiles from the preserved evidence, profiles that could then be compared against databases and used to identify suspects. In June 2025, Ryland Headley was convicted in connection with Louisa's case. Headley, who was 92 years old at the time of his conviction, had a history of similar offenses. The DNA evidence conclusively linked him to the scene, finally providing the proof that had eluded investigators for nearly 6 decades. Detective Trevor Mason characterized the case in stark terms, emphasizing the seriousness of what had occurred. As of 2025, with Headley's conviction, Louisa Dunn's case stands as resolved. Though the long delay before justice was achieved raises questions about how many other cold cases might be solved with adequate resources and persistence. The case serves as an inspiration for investigators working on unsolved crimes and offers hope to families still seeking answers about their loved ones. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.